And welcome to another exciting adventure on the energy that surrounds us. I'm your host, Michael. And just a little quick heads up, this will be my last episode on the road trip. Next week, I will be airing episodes back from my usual little area. So, just a heads up to everyone that, yeah, I'm actually winding up my little road trip today and heading back. So, it's been a wild month and a half, but looking forward to getting home back to my little fur babies and family. So, with that being said, I could not think of a better guest to bring to you all for this occasion and this night. She has such an incredible bio that I could not do justice to even start to even think about how to introduce it. So I am going to hand it off to my amazing, awesome guest to introduce herself, the one, the only, talented, amazing Suzanne Chancellor.
Hello. Wow, what an introduction. I don't know. How do I follow that up? Very nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I don't know how to introduce myself. I am an experiencer. I grew up in California. That's where most of my experiences started. No, I should say that's where all of my experiences started. I grew up in a very nice neighborhood in Pasadena, California. My father worked for Jet Propulsion Laboratories. My grandfather worked for Caltech. And so they were both working in these side-by-side space programs simultaneously. Um, but my first experience that happened when I lived there, I did not recollect until I was 26 years old after reading Whitley Strieber's Communion. And I'm sure that many people out there who are listening to this interview can raise their hands that that happened to them. All the experiencers out there who saw the cover of that book, Communion, and thought, oh my gosh, number one, they were scared out of their mind. Number two, they had to have the book. And number three, they read it in 24 hours like I did. And after I read that book, I realized that all the things that had happened to me in my lifetime that I thought were dreams were actually reality. And I couldn't believe that there was somebody else out there like me, not knowing that there were more than just Whitley. But at that moment, I thought I needed to connect with him. And so upon finishing the book, I promptly wrote him an 11-page letter and sent it to his publisher. And unfortunately, it was returned to me. I guess I didn't have the right connection to get it to him. And I was pretty devastated because I felt like I had been living a double life my entire life. And I was finally going to get resolution. And with the return of that letter, I was just let down and went back to living my secret life as an experiencer and getting married, having kids, having a great career, having to keep that a secret. My entire life was very stressful. And, at the time, I never spoke about it to anyone. Nobody knew anything about it. I never told my parents. I never told my friends. I didn't tell my ex-husband. And what ended up happening was when I was 28 years old, I had gotten a divorce from my first husband, and I met a man who was very serious about, getting engaged to me. And he proposed to me, and I just like my heart was racing because I was in a panic. I felt like I have to be honest with him. I finally need to come clean. I finally need to be transparent about my experiences because I knew I had no control over it and it might not include him. And so I told him that. I said, there's something I need to tell you. I've been an experiencer my entire life and I have no control over it. And I can't promise that it's not going to involve you. So if you have a problem with that, please don't marry me.
Wow, that's a proposal right there.
Well, I felt like I just, on the one hand, I felt like I was living a lie. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
Because
I do.
nobody knew. I'm sure after speaking with you before the show, I know you understand what I mean. Having to have this, just keeping this under wraps, it's very stressful. And I needed a release. I needed to be with somebody who wanted to have a relationship, a pure, true relationship that wanted to respect what was happening with me and be honest with me that if they had a problem with it, that they didn't want to be involved in that relationship. And so he just looked at me and he was like, okay, you know, and I was like, oh, all right. Well, I mean, I'm telling you. And he says, no, I'm all right with it. And I'm like, okay. So we ended up getting married and ironically enough, the experiences ended up ramping up. And I mean, it was really almost like I'm gonna say not a nightly thing, but maybe about 3 or 4 times a week, things were happening. Now, we moved to an area in California, which was about 40 miles north of Los Angeles, and there was a heavy military area near us. Port Hueneme was probably about, like, as a crow flies, maybe about 10 minutes away from where we lived. And that was always in the back of my mind, that possibly I lived literally about 10 minutes away on the other direction when I had a lot of experiences as a child. So I actually lived in close proximity to where I moved to when I was 9 years old. And I moved to Newbury Park, California, which is a small community in Ventura County in California. And so when I moved to Camarillo, and these experiences started ramping up, and it was just like my husband said to me, no, actually, he was my fiance at the time. We actually got engaged, and then we moved to Camarillo, and then we got married. Backwards, I know. So what happened was when we moved there, it was just like I think he felt like things were happening, but he didn't know how to address it to me. And so he would say to me, "Did the visitors come last night?" Because I slept like crap. And I would stop and I would think about it and I'd say, maybe I don't remember, but I think something did happen and I didn't have like a real recollection of what had happened right away. But the funny thing is, when I said maybe or I think so or yes, he never wanted to know what happened. He just looked at me and he'd turn around and he'd walk away. And I was a little, I think he was in denial that maybe what I had said, I would just, I don't know, maybe he didn't really take it seriously, but it was serious, I was dead serious. So this happened a lot where he would, approach me with this statement. And so it became like an inside joke. And just maybe it made him, maybe he was just a little nervous about it. I think it made him feel more comfortable about it. But one night, I was laying in bed and he was sleeping next to me and I couldn't fall asleep and I was looking up at the ceiling and I had this really, I don't know, I was having a hard time just relaxing. I was just felt really like full of energy. And I looked up at the ceiling and I saw all these little like circles and squares and rectangles and they're all like circling around the ceiling and they look like little prisms. Like if you had held like a crystal in the window and the light would reflect through it and so it makes like a prism on the wall. You know how that happens? well, it looked like that on the ceiling, and it was just like going around and around. I was like, what the heck? And I thought, well, maybe a car was driving down the street and the light was refracting from the headlights through something and shining on the ceiling. But when I went to look at the window, I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed. And I started to panic, but I couldn't scream. And the minute that I was panicking and I couldn't scream, a gold disc flew across my body and manifested into a woman standing next to me on the left side of the bed. And I couldn't turn my head, but I could see her in my periphery or in my peripheral vision. And I could tell it was a woman with long blonde hair. And I'm thinking in my head, like, oh my God, what is happening? And as I'm thinking that, she's speaking to me telepathically. And she says, where I come from, marriage is the most sacred part of our existence. And I am giving you the chance to experience this if you wish. I will never forget that.
That's a beautiful gift, though.
And right, I'm thinking in my head at that moment, I'm thinking, not even thinking about what she's saying because I'm so freaked out about the situation that all I could think of was, um, I'm so glad you don't look like what you really look like because if you did, I think I would freak out. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, what she said, like you said, was very beautiful and very profound because I'm thinking, well, does she want me to come with her? You know, am I going to like her planet to see what it's like to be married somewhere else? And I don't know. It was just like all these thoughts, but I didn't think that until afterwards. What I thought in the moment was, I'm glad you don't look like whatever it is you are, really, you know? So she says to me again telepathically, well, if you want to know what I look like, then look at the window. Now, again, I couldn't turn my head, but I could move my eyes, and when I could look at my window, I could see a mantis being hanging from the windowsill. I could see its hands just hanging on the windowsill, and its head was tilted to the side. And I'm screaming inside, but nothing's coming out. And the minute I'm screaming inside, my doorknob jiggles, the bedroom doorknob. She looks at the door and she runs across the room and disappears through the wall. And the minute she disappears through the wall, the bedroom door flies open and three little blue beings come and they walk and they stand at the foot of my bed. And I'm thinking, what is happening? You know, these three little blue, like little Michelin men, they're probably about 3.5, 4, maybe about 4 feet tall. And they have little round black cobalt black coal eyes. Their bodies were blue, but they were almost like self-illuminating. But they didn't like light up the room. It was like they were completely contained. The light was inside of them. And I'm looking at them like, what? And they said, it's Elise. We can't get her to stop throwing up. And Elise is my daughter. And the minute they said that, I had this fight or flight feeling that I had to get to my baby. And so, for whatever reason, I was able to break through my paralysis. And I just ran down the hallway. And as I ran down the hallway, she was crying in her bedroom. I walk in the bedroom and she says, Mommy, Mommy, and she just starts vomiting all over the bed. And so at that point, my fiance wakes up and comes down the hall. He says, what's going on? I said, turn the bath on, please. So we turned the bath on and we put her in the bathtub to clean her off because she was a mess. I changed her bed sheets, and when we dried her off, I put her back in bed and she laid down with me. And when she fell asleep, I went back to bed and I fell asleep like nothing had happened after all that. And in the morning, she was totally fine. She was just like nothing had happened. And I looked at my fiance and he's standing in the kitchen and he starts to say, did the visit, you know, he's starting to say that. Then I went, shh, don't say anything. And I just said, just don't say anything. And he just kind of looked at me like, what? What's going on? So I brought my daughter a bowl of cereal, and she was sitting at the kitchen table, and I looked down and she was drawing a picture. I actually have a picture. I just remember that. I wonder if I do. Didn't realize I was going to be telling the story right away, but um, well, I'll just tell you. She drew a picture, and it was of this little round head with round black eyes, and there were two lines where the ears would be, like if an animal had ears on the side or a person, but there were no ears. There were just these lines. Then there was a line across the neck, and then over its head there was like a squiggly thing. And I said, "Oh, honey, that's really cute. What is that?" And she said, "Oh, it's the animal from my dream last night." And I thought, "Oh my God," I just had this really sick feeling, but I didn't want her to know that I was scared. And so I just kept smiling. And, but I wanted to know more. And so I began to prompt her about the drawing a little bit more, but just out of curiosity, not to, coax her into saying something that maybe didn't happen. And I said, "Oh, well, honey, it doesn't really look like an animal." And she says, "Well, they're not really animals, but they're not really people either." And then I started getting really nervous because I felt like what had happened really did involve her. And I was sick to my stomach. And I said, "Well, what were they doing, honey?" And I said, "Tell me more about them, or tell me more about it." And she says, "Well, there were three of them, and they were blue." I said, "Oh, well, what were they doing? What were they doing, with you?" And she says, "Oh, well, they were smelling me, and they were telling me that they loved me." And I was just like thinking of all the stories that I had heard about, um, I would say visitations or abductions where they would comfort the children and tell them these things so they wouldn't be afraid. And I thought, oh my gosh, something has probably happened. But it's like I didn't want to know about it, but I did want to know about it because I wanted to protect her. But I knew that there was no way I was going to be able to protect her because it was something that I had absolutely no control over in my own life. And then I got angry. So I asked her again. I said, "Well, what's this little thing over its head?" And she said, "Oh, well, it's a cloud, Mommy. They come from the clouds." And I thought, "Oh my gosh, okay, honey, thank you." And I went to the other room and I just started crying because, this is something that's been a part of my life. And the last thing I would ever want is to have that be a part of, you know, anyone's life, especially my own family or my child, my small child, my innocent, little 3-year-old or, yeah, 3-year-old child. So, the only good thing that came out of that experience is that I finally had confirmation that these things were really happening because now it involves somebody else that could validate my experience as being real. And but I vowed to myself from that point that I would take all of my UFO books off the shelves. I would not watch any, science fiction movies anymore, anything. I didn't want to influence her in any way or be afraid of anything potentially that would scare her. So I also vowed that I would never talk about it publicly until they were adults. I had another child after that, but after she was an adult, and then subsequently my next child, because I was so afraid that something would happen where, I mean, nobody talked about that stuff and they might think I was crazy. And what if I lost custody of my kids? Or what if I lost my job? You know? So,
I know society makes it so hard for people who have these experiences to have any outlet, because I can totally relate to how you're feeling and what you're thinking, because being there, it's like, how, yeah, it's like everybody always says, oh, I was able to talk to so and so and so and so. And I was like, yeah, but when you're experiencing something like seeing star beams or aliens or UFOs, we didn't have that growing up. And
Right.
so it's hard, I think, for people in today's world to go, how, why would you think that or this or that? Because they're looking at the world today where we do have the ability to talk about this and share
Right.
it and not be judged. But
Right.
that wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago. And
Mm.
so I thank you for bringing that up and bringing awareness to that, because that is a part of the history of our planetary growth that I think
Yeah.
people forget about, because they're so used to, this is where we're at, this is what we experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I can relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that free flow of information like we're
Right.
doing,
Right.
but that didn't
Right.
exist then.
No. Yeah, and when you think, I mean, you were speaking earlier about your upbringing and being influenced. There was a lot of um, things happening around you where you know everyone's a real God-fearing community, and even talking about ghosts, it's the devil, and so you just don't talk about that kind of stuff, most people. And so even talking about anything paranormal would be, of the devil per se. Um, but that conversation has changed over the years. Thank goodness, because so many things have been brought to the forefront in our society that has allowed us to speak freely, speak our truths freely, and be able to live our lives as we see fit and not be a laughing stock of the community. Or I can wear a UFO hat with an alien on it and not have people like shake their head, Not that I do, but I'm saying if I chose to.
You have options now.
That is correct. um,
One question I'm curious about, and you can answer if you can, is looking at the situation today in today's eyes,
mm,
what you were witnessing then, knowing what you know now, would you feel the same reaction, or would you be looking at it in a different way and saying, a different light?
um, hmm. You know, I think I think this whole thing is like an evolutionary process. I think for me personally, I didn't think of anything about it for years and years, but the more the conversation has opened up, it has allowed me to look at it in a different light. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And like with you, looking on the metaphysical side of things, that's always been in the periphery as well. But we're allowed now to have these conversations. And, in retrospect, I thank Whitley so much for, if he hadn't written that book, I wouldn't have been able to look back on my life through different glasses, per se, and say, okay, wow. So when this happened, that was really this. Or when this happened, oh, well, that was really this, And so now I know that I haven't lost my mind all those years. Um, Now I know that I'm more normal than I thought I was, that, this is something that is happening all the time to millions of people and has been for centuries, but we are so lucky to have these communities and have people like you to have these shows where we can share these experiences so others can come forward and have their own peace of mind and to be able to relate their own experiences to others. I'm currently um, collecting data on the orb phenomenon. I had an experience a few years ago that has sent me down a rabbit hole of sorts, as you do. And I've come to realize that there seems to be a lot of commonalities with orange, especially orange orb experiencers. Um, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Christopher Bledsoe. He has these incredible orb sightings near where he lives in North Carolina, and it's like he knows when they're coming, and when he goes out there, then they show up. And there's definitely a communication happening with a lot of these experiencers that are seeing these anomalies. And it seems that there seem to be a lot of other things happening surrounding these sightings that seem to be congruent with the experiencers. For example, I started researching and speaking to people around the world, Berlin and in Scotland, in Australia, um, and they've all said pretty much the same things, whereas they've had, maybe something happened prior to their sighting, then something happened after the sighting. And so that to me seems to be very important to make a note of. And so I'm feeling the desire or the need to collect this data because I think it's important. I think there's something connected with these sightings. It's definitely a totally different thing than we've been seeing for years with all the different craft. And interestingly enough, I also think that even the craft themselves have evolved into different types of machinery over the years. That to me is fascinating. When you think back at George Adamski, you think back at all the old saucer-shaped craft that people would draw pictures of. Seems so antiquated compared to the things that people are seeing today. I think that's very interesting.
I agree, and I like how you're pointing out, the evolution of the thoughts and the evolution of, again, where we came from and where we're going to. And one of the things that I'm curious about is how you look at the experiences now, like modern contact experience that
Hmm.
you have or that you read about. Are you more at ease with it, or do you still have
Hmm.
a little uneasiness to it, or where are you now with it?
Well, that's a really good question, Michael, because I have given that a lot of thought. In fact, I did an interview a while ago because I really felt that the visitor experience is evolving. And when I say evolving, I mean um, based on my own personal experience, it seems as though the very earlier experiences involved certain beings, the Greys in particular. As I got older, it seemed that different beings were becoming integrated into other experiences. Where when I was 9 years old, I actually had an experience on a craft, which I can talk about in a while. Um, and then as I started getting older, it seemed to evolve into having more and more different types of beings, like the one I just shared. When I had a mantis being, and then I had this woman, and then I had, these three little Michelin men. I mean, I've never heard of another experiencer tell a story like that. So I thought I was losing my mind, you know, like I was hallucinating. But then the fact that my daughter had drawn that, it just was like, oh my gosh, that really happened. So anyway, so that happened. Now, in my 20s, my late 20s, early 30s, I started feeling like there was a shift in my experiences. And what I felt was I felt like I was protected. And what I mean by that is that I had an experience where I had grays show up in my room and they just stood there. I felt like there was like an imaginary border between me and them. And they weren't allowed to cross it. Like they weren't allowed to interact with me for some reason. And I looked at them and I literally remember saying in my head, "Can I help you?" You know, because they were just standing there and I wasn't used to that. And they said to me in my head, they said, "We are the Greys and we are here." And I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. I mean, who says that? And I'm like, "Can I get you something? Do you want to have a seat?" I felt for the first time I had no fear. And that was really weird. You know, it was like, why is this happening? I mean, why aren't they coming near me? And afterwards, I started thinking about it and I thought, wow, maybe all of that part of my experience is over. Maybe all of the, what, I don't know. I've never been regressed, so I don't really know exactly what happened when I was taken. I don't really feel like I need to know. I feel like I've remembered enough. I feel like I've remembered what I should know. Do you know what I mean? And if I was to be regressed, I feel like I would remember things that I don't want to know. I don't think it would serve me because if I don't remember it, maybe there's a reason why I don't remember it. So I choose to just live my life and remember what I remember. But anyway, as I was saying, so the experience seems to have changed into a more of a conscious contact. And I also have very high precognition and psychic abilities and remote viewing. All those things have ramped up from my 20s on through my 30s and into my 40s and has completely changed into a completely different type of experience. Receiving downloads, having precognitive dreams. Um, I mean, I've had a few experiences now with my husband that who's also an experiencer, where we've had joint contact, and that's another long story, like how we met and stuff. But so we also had an event here 10 years ago with an orb that came up behind our house. We have a lake, and about a 10-foot diameter orange orb came up out of the water when I was standing in the backyard. And it looked like, say, like a pinball, how it's metallic. Say that pinball was hollow, but filled with roiling lava. And it was about 10 feet in diameter. That's what I saw coming up out of the water. And so I panicked and I yelled for him to come over because it was going to disappear behind the tree canopy. But I knew it was going to reappear above it. And so I said, "Hurry up, come over." And so we stood there waiting for it, but it never reappeared. And I lost my mind. I'm like, what is happening? I just saw, where did it go? I mean, it was enormous. It was just enormous. And he was looking at me like I was out of my mind. I was out of my mind, but I was just crazed about, fanatic about what had just happened.
Well, and it's interesting too because you say it looked like it was filled with lava,
Yes.
but it came out of water, and it's like we're
Yes.
taught water and lava don't mix. There could be
Yes.
steam or some chemical reaction, and there
Exactly.
isn't.
Nothing. Nothing. So was telling him we needed to drive around the neighborhood and find out what happened. And he just looked at me like I was out of my mind. And I remember feeling like I was so red in the face as I was yelling at him. And he said, and they said, "Oh yeah, at first he just kind of stopped really still. And he looked at me. He kind of had this really glazed look on his face. And he put his hands on my shoulders. And he said, "What you saw was only meant for you." And I thought, okay. And the minute that happened, a monarch butterfly flew right in between our faces, just like that. And I was like, what is happening? And I broke out of it and I said, no, we're going to look for that thing right now. And so he just rolled his eyes and we got in the car and we drove around. And I thought for sure somebody would be standing outside and, pointing to the sky, or maybe, there had to be like a crowd of people like going, oh my God, did you see that? There was nobody. There was absolutely nobody out there. And I thought, okay, maybe there was a fire. Maybe there was a fire truck somewhere. Maybe I saw a fire from across the lake. Well, there was nothing. So I came back home and I just was very disappointed that I had no resolution. And so what happened was the next day, he worked nights and he would leave at 6:30 at night to go to work, and he would get home at about 3:30 in the morning. So he came home for lunch at 11 o'clock, and then we went to bed late that night when he got home. And then the next morning, we lost power. And there was all this commotion outside, and I looked out the window and I couldn't see across the yard. And it was like there was a storm happening, and the clouds were touching the ground, and there was branches just swirling around. And then on top of that, there was lightning and thunder like every 10 seconds. And I thought, what is happening? My tomatoes, I had just planted tomatoes. All I could think about was saving my tomatoes. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, I have to save my tomatoes. So I ran outside. Mistake. Because it was clearly something, a huge, like thunderstorm or a tornado or something. So it went through and we had lost power for 4 days. But I thought it was really strange that I had just seen that orb. And then all of a sudden he started acting really weird. And I was like, what's going on? And he was like biting his tongue and he would bite his cheek, and then he would call me by his ex-girlfriend's name. And something was just off. And so he called the his doctor's exchange, and they said that he should go to the hospital. And it turned out that he was having a brain bleed. So we got ambulance to another hospital and they did an MRI, and they didn't know if he had a brain tumor. It was just a long thing. And so anyway, he had the bleed. He didn't have a tumor. He made a full recovery. But now, after I'm doing all of these interviews with people that have had these sightings with the orbs, I'm coming to realize that there's a lot of congruencies. And then Dr. Gary Nolan, I don't know if you know who he is. He's a Stanford doctor who is doing a study on the brains of experiencers who are experiencing brain damage. So now that I'm starting to realize that a lot of these experiencers of these orbs were having abduction experiences right around the same time, I'm wondering if we had an experience with that orb. What if that was really an abduction that we don't remember? And maybe he has damage from that. So we're in the midst of trying to suss that out right now. And I mean, not that we can actually, change anything, but I mean, he's still having serious issues with his brain. And that was over 10 years ago.
I hope he finds resolution with it. And
Thank you.
one of the
Thank
things
you.
that, with my perspective of seeing events unfolding, I'm kind of noticing you mentioned having precog abilities, and
Yes.
I noticed, event happens, daughter got sick. Event happens, something
Mm,
happened with your husband. If they're
mm.
coming to warn you, to let you know so that you're
I,
there
I
and able to help faster, because, like, you're them saying we can't get your daughter to stop throwing up, but she's not
Yes.
throwing up.
Yes.
And so you jump up and get there just as she starts, so you
Right,
can get on it faster.
right,
And a brain bleed, I'm not a medical person, but I don't know if that would show up in anything. But yet, look at you had this experience that uncovered that. And so it seems like they're showing you, like, in a, I guess, in a way that you'll pay attention and go, what's going on? We need to get this checked. And
right. I don't know. It's so hard to know, Michael. It's just it's so baffling. It's like, I started going down this rabbit hole with the retro causality where, about time, what is time really? And, time does not exist and things happen backwards, and is that precog, So I have that experience all the time where I picked up a book one day off the bookshelf that I'd never seen before, and I made a note of it and I put it back on the bookshelf. I was dusting the bookshelf. That night I was watching some game show, and one of the questions was about this very book that I had picked up like 5 hours prior. Out of all the books in the world, I picked that book up out of the shelf, looked at it, put it back, and then this was the answer to the question was the title of this book. And that happens all the time to me.
yeah,
All the
and
time.
I have to admit, I don't think I've had anyone who claims to have precog on this show before.
Oh, really?
And so I'm like, I'm feeling remiss if I wouldn't ask, like, how does it work and how does it feel and how did it start?
Wow. I mean, how did it start? Yikes. Um, when
In
I was
your
in high school,
experience.
when I was in high school, I mean, I I I'm so glad I had the wherewithal to write all this down because I love to write. Um, I was an avid writer my entire life and I kept a journal. But when I started having these dreams, I was like, oh my gosh, and so I'm so glad I did because since they never seem to be going away, I'm still having them to this day. Um, I think there's really something connected with the experience and being connected to, like we were talking about, different vibrations, different frequencies, having other dimensional realities, coming in and out. I think that has something to do with that as well. Because if everything's happening at the same time, that would make perfect sense. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do actually.
Okay, good. So when I was in high school, my first precognitive dream was when I had a dream that there was like a VW Rabbit. Do you remember that old? Maybe you might not know. You're probably way too young to know what kind of a car that is.
Oh,
But
I've seen them.
okay, so I dreamed that I was at a golf course and it was at night, and this VW Rabbit, it was like a tan rabbit, it was going through this golf course just joyriding. And I could hear that the grass was really slick because it was very dewy, and it fishtailed. And I'm watching it fishtail, and it T-boned a tree. And I watched as the driver got out, and it was a young kid, and he went around to the passenger side, and there was a girl who was unresponsive in the passenger seat, and she ended up passing from the accident. And I woke up in the morning and I was like, oh my God, that was so real. Number one, it was horrible. And he was crying. I remember just the stress of him crying and like, wow, just how realistic it was. Like I felt his sorrow so much inside of me. And so my daily thing when I would I was 16, I remember I was getting ready to go to school and I would have breakfast and read the paper. That's what I did when I was in high school. Don't ask me why. Like what kid reads the paper like their dad would? I don't know. It's kind of weird. And it was in the newspaper that there was these kids that were joyriding on the golf course, and this girl died. And I dreamed about it. And here I'm reading it, and I brought it to my mom, and I'm like, Mom, oh my God. And she just looked at me like, what? She's like, no, you had to have read that before. I'm like, no, Mom, I swear, I dreamed this last night. So stressful.
Well, and it's interesting too. Like, why would they give you the dream and then wake up and read it in the paper? It's like, we think about like Minority Report, the movie, or other
Right, right.
things of, if you have this information, can you prevent it? But in your case, it's
Yeah,
like there's no way to prevent because it's happening as you're seeing it, maybe even.
yeah, yeah. Well, that has happened too, and that's an interesting one I'll share with you. But and then I remember another one where then I just had all these. After that, when I was 16, then I had all these synchronicities that were just like massive, like undeniable synchronicities that there was more than this because there was no way that this could have happened the way that it did. And what happened was I I was 17. My mother and my stepfather were a captain and a chef on a sailboat in the Caribbean when we lived in California. Our next door neighbors moved to Florida. So what they were going to do was they're going to drop us off, my sister and I off with our friends, and then they were going to fly to Miami and then go to the Caribbean and sail while we stayed with the friends. So we went to Los Angeles Airport and we're sitting in the waiting area at the gate. And it's a funny story. So I'm just sitting there like I was gonna miss my boyfriend. I had a boyfriend and we were so in love, And it was my first time I would be away from him and I was like devastated. I was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? Just so sad. And this family sits directly across from us, facing us, and it was a two boys and a mother and a father. And I looked at the older brother, and he was very cute. I mean, he was really good looking, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even look at him. He was so good looking. He looked like, do you remember the movie Blue Lagoon
I
with
do.
Brooke Shields? Do you remember the boy? He
Yeah.
looked just like him. And I was like, oh my gosh, is he on our flight? And they were. They were on our flight, and he was looking at me, and I was looking at him, and he would look back at me, and I would be kind of looking at him, and there was this thing happening. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening? I have a boyfriend. So anyway, I can't believe I'm telling you the story. This is so funny. So we flew from Los Angeles to Dallas, and when we went to Dallas, we went to the next gate to catch our connecting flight, and here was that family again. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. They're on our plane again from Dallas to Pensacola, or no, Dallas to Gulf Breeze, I think is what it was. Or was it Pensacola? One of the two, regardless. So here, and he looked at me and I looked and I smiled. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm blushing. I thought, wow, this is so weird. So we fly from Dallas to Florida, and where our friends picked us up at the airport. And so we said goodbye to my parents, and they went down to Miami, and then we went in the car and we drove to our friend's house in Pensacola. We get out of the car, and I look next door, and somebody's getting out of the car next door, and it's them. They're their next door neighbors.
Oh, I'm loving the synchronicity.
I mean, what in the world? So I ran in the house and slammed the door because I was like, what am I going to do? What is happening? he came over and knocked on the door and introduced himself. He says, "Well, I guess we're hanging out for the summer." I said, "I guess so." And that was that. Anyway, that was just one interesting synchronicity, I thought, anyway.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny that we've all had those moments of seeing someone, and it's like feeling something, but we don't know what, and going,
Right.
huh? And then they're on the next flight.
And then the connecting flight, and then they're next door neighbors. I mean, come on. So who's the puppet master with this? Do you know what I mean?
I know,
It's got
and
to be like, are we like living in a simulation? Is this like a video game? Have you ever thought of that?
I have, and
Yeah.
it feels like it's a lot of times, and I'm kind of somewhat laughing too of someone going, you say you're in this relationship, and here we put this in front of you, and look how
That's
fast
true.
that disappeared. Huh? Should you be over here, or should what? And it's like,
Well, nothing happened, and then I went back home, and everything was just, status quo. So I think it was just, I don't know, when you think about why these things end up in our lives, things happen, these synchronicities where people just fall into your life for a minute or whatever, and you just think, wow, what's the lesson that I'm learning here? Or is it to pay attention to, that there's something bigger than, like this synchronicity is just, that just can't be written.
yeah,
So then,
and even on another level is, I know this is going to sound a little strange, but he could have been an experiencer. You being an experiencer, we
yes,
could have been connecting over that.
yes, yes. I mean, I asked, I contacted my friend and I said, "Do you ever talk to him anymore? Because I really would like to talk to him because I did think that. I thought maybe there was some sort of that maybe we knew each other from an experience or something, and that's always possible. That happened with my husband, so I mean, for sure, it's possible. So, but then I had more experiences like that where I had more precognition. I've had so many precognitive dreams, but then in what year was that? I was years later, I was living in Hollywood, California. Um, it was 2011. I had a dream where I woke up standing up, holding hands with five other people. And we're just standing there side by side, and we're all looking at each other like, what are we doing here? We had no idea what we were doing here, but we knew we were here for a reason. And then we looked ahead of us and we saw a double decker, like a tour bus, those tour buses that travel across country. Like the first story is all luggage, and then you walk up, and so you're like on the second is story is where all the seating is.
Right.
So we saw a bus like that capsize on its side. There was no other car involved like in an accident. It was just almost like the bus had tipped on its side. And we all just ran to the bus. And we ran into the bus and we went into the bus. And when I say we went into the bus, I went right through the windshield. And as I went through the windshield, there's all these women and kids screaming and crying. And some of them are hanging from seatbelts and stuff, and they couldn't get themselves out. And all of a sudden, I zoomed in on this one woman, and she was speaking to me telepathically, but in another language, "Help my baby." And I understood what she said, even though it was some other language. And so I'm looking for the baby, and I could see underneath the seat there was a small child, and I pulled her out, and she had a gash on her cheek. And then I unlocked the mom from the seatbelt. And the minute I did that, I looked around at all the people that had to come into the bus with me, and they were all doing the same thing. They were all attending to one person, like I was. Like we were all assigned somebody to check up on and make sure they were okay. So once I saw that they were attending to people, I looked around to make sure nobody else needed help. And once I assessed that everybody would seem to be fine, it's like I got sucked back out of the bus into my body, and then I woke up sitting up. And I was like, what just happened? That was so crazy. And I told my boyfriend at the time, I said, oh my gosh, I just had the weirdest dream. And so I told him the dream, and he's like, oh man, you're weird, whatever, because I was weird. I mean, I always had weird dreams anyway. But this was really realistic. And all day, I remember it was a Saturday, and I was just running errands, and I just couldn't shake it. I could not stop thinking about this dream. And I was obsessed. And once I was done with my errands, I came home, got on the computer, and I just Googled bus crash. And then I put Europe because I knew it was a European language that she was speaking. And then I put the date down, which was July 7th, 2011. And when I did that, I scrolled 3 pages, and on the third page, there was a little thumbnail of the bus. And when I clicked on it, it was the bus from my dream. And the article was about a tour bus in Bulgaria that had capsized, full of women and children on their way to a summer camp. And it was actually mothers and their daughters. But there was one fatality. And I went, oh my God, how did I miss that? Because the person was ejected from the bus, but I didn't see it. I realized that the time of the accident happened while I was sleeping because of the time difference. So I felt like I was there, that all these people that were with me were there. And then it made me think about, are we the guardian angels that people see when they get in an accident when we sleep? Do we do that work when we sleep? When people say, oh, I saw this angel, are we the angels
Ooh, I'm
when we're
getting
sleeping?
chills thinking that. That is so
Right?
cool of thought.
Isn't that, I mean, what else can, how did that happen? What else could it be? You know?
And it would be interesting too because it's like you're saying, there was six of you, six needed help,
Mm,
six got the help,
yeah.
but nobody's there.
And they all
And,
probably had the same thing happen to them and they got sucked back into their body and were back in their bed.
and I would almost go to say, the fact that you didn't see the one fatality
Hmm.
is because it was their time
Oh.
and you weren't supposed to interfere with
Hmm.
that
Oh, maybe.
because if you were allowed to stay and investigate, and walk around and help others, probably
Hmm.
would have found them.
Mm.
But because you were sucked out, as you said, and put back in your body, it's like the universe's way of saying, nope, we're keeping the balance. This one had to go, and so don't.
I
That's
never
not
thought
on
about
you.
that. Hmm. Interesting perspective.
Welcome to my world, weird world.
Tell me about it. Tell me about your real world. I mean, so this resonates with you, obviously, for whatever reason. You would actually come up with that, statement
So,
about it being their time.
well, that and I actually delve into like astral traveling and traveling
Okay.
on planes while you sleep. And
Okay.
so I have this rare innate ability of if I have a couple of friends that when I sense them or feel like them calling me because they need help with something, I travel so fast on the astral plane that I'm like, I'm there. and they can
Wow.
sense that I arrive and that
Hmm.
I'm able to help. And then when it's over, I leave and go about whatever I'm doing. And the thing that's kind of comical about it is I could be like, like you were saying, being on a craft or being on another world, and I can still hear them or feel them to the point
Mm.
that, like, I have a vague memory of like doing some important work, and in the middle of it, standing up and go, "I'll be right back." Going, helping a friend,
Oh my gosh.
finishing that, and coming back to them, and I'm
Hmm.
like, "Okay, where were we?" And they're like, "You just stood up." I was like, "Okay, good. So this is where we're at," and continuing, and that's how fast we can move in the astral, in my
Wow.
opinion and
Right.
belief. And
Right.
so hearing your story, it's like in the back of my mind, I'm going, is she being pulled into the astral plane and moving, doing some work, and just doesn't know about the astral plane and doesn't know how to view it? But then again, I'm like, I've never heard though of anyone that being sucked back into their body without somebody waking them up. And that's the one thing about astral travel that is the hard part about it, is like when you're with someone, is when you leave your body to travel on the astral plane, if someone shakes you awake, no matter where you are, it's actually, we coined the term being sucked back in, and you don't
Mm.
sit there and be like in your body and go, "Oh, what do you need?" It's a, "Oh, my body hurts because I was not
Mm.
in it and you just slammed me into my body,
Mm.
waking me
Mm.
up." What?
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, I don't. I I've never. When I was probably 7 or 8 years old, I do remember having out of body experiences. But I again, oh, they were just. I just was dreaming of flying. Is all I could equate it to, because that's all I could comprehend that it could be, is dreaming that I was flying. But now all these years later, with everything that I know about the experience and having this experience of out of body. See, now I don't know how to coin this. Is this an out of body experience, or did I remote view something? Do you know what I'm saying? Is there like a crossover between the two?
It could be, but I've never heard of anyone remote viewing and able to manipulate the area. And I don't mean manipulate like make somebody do something. I mean manipulate as in physically make contact with someone and, like you're saying, pick up a child and
Yes,
unbuckle someone. I've never
yes.
heard any of my remote viewing friends ever talking about that.
I've never heard about it either. So that's why I've never heard of anybody having this experience. So I keep trying to put this out there in hopes that somebody will contact me, please, if you've had this
Well,
experience.
and the beauty of it is I have the experience of being able to travel to distant worlds or different dimensions. Not everybody can. So you
Mm.
may be a remote viewer who can make tangible contact
Mm.
where others can't. We're all at different levels and different abilities. And so I would not sit back and say, I don't think this is this because nobody else does. I
Hmm.
would look at it instead and say, look how cool it is. I can do this, and look at it that way, because we're all different, but we all have similar abilities, so to speak. And we, I mean, like remote viewing, anyone could do it. It's
I
just a
know,
matter
that's
of,
true.
how much practice and what your intentions are.
True.
And so you being able to do what you do is like maybe like remote viewing 2.0, and you're here to show people, hey,
Yeah,
now
but
that you
that,
have this
mhm,
aspect, what
right,
about trying this?
right,
And
right,
come join me in doing this.
right. You know, I really want one of the authors that I'm doing some editing for right now is at the Monroe Institute right now for a week. And I really want to go there because I have this feeling that I am like tapped into something with remote viewing or with and with OBE somehow. So I want to see, where I lie in that and try and hone whatever it is because I feel like it's there for a reason. Like it's like when people are born healers, they need to utilize that for the greater good. And I feel the same way about this. Maybe there's something I could do with this ability.
And I would even venture to say not only, like, some people call it callings to do stuff, but
Mm,
the one thing that I find interesting about the ones that are gifted with missions, like is the term that I use, or, you know, certain
calling.
journey lessons to learn and to help. And I joined this organization to kind of look into it, and it's about healers. And I was like, well, I don't really practice like everybody does the healing aspect, so not quite sure that the healer title works for me. And my mom goes, well, but you're more of a way shower than a healer. And I was like, that resonated with me. And I was like, I like that. And so I told the lady who runs the organization, I was like, maybe change the title to this. And she like wrote me this cute little message of like, oh my God, that is so you. Yeah, you're going to be our first way shower. And it's now a thing on the her group that you can be a healer, a way shower, or something else. But
Explain
I'm
explain way shower to me.
way shower is someone who is gifted and is like a guide who will sit there and
Okay,
say to
I see.
people, okay, so you had this ability. Here's a safe space. Let's talk about it. How can you utilize that? What's your goal to using this? What's your calling? What are you wanting to do with it? And just help them and be there just as a support so that they're comfortable to do what they need to do. And so I feel like all of those, like you're saying, the healers are, they go into the healing. It's what they do.
Right.
And everybody is called to do what they're doing. And it's not a choice. It's like, I feel like it's weird to say it's not a choice
Mm,
because, I mean, we all have free will to choose,
right.
but it seems like it chooses us. And
Yeah.
we're all put through scenarios to empower us and learn from, so that when the next
Mhm.
person comes up and says,
Mhm.
oh my God, I'm going through this and I feel so stuck in this, you're like,
Mm.
oh, believe me, I know. So if you think about it and look at it this way, and there's like all of a sudden this, you can see the light in the people's eye of going, oh my God, you're right.
Mm.
Okay. And they're not stuck anymore and they're free to go, and it's like doing their thing.
Mm.
So I feel like, maybe that's why you do what you do, is to show everybody, kind of like a Neo thing where
Right.
we
Yeah,
we can do this.
and and I think, like you said, we can all learn how to do remote viewing, and I think a lot of it, a lot of these things is more that we all need to understand that if we just pay attention to these things, um, like they'll happen. I would say you like you're manifesting. For example, when you recognize the synchronicities in your life, then you just pay attention when they happen. A lot of people don't pay attention to these things, and so they don't really, I'm gonna say they don't believe in it, but it's not part of their reality because they just don't pay attention to it. But it's there.
Right. And it's interesting too because not only is it not paying attention and, being more observant than others, but we're also in a time now, and I may have my age of when it happened with you a little off, but it seems interesting that these experiences elevated in the time frame where you could talk about it and share it
Mhm.
with people. And
Mm,
so
mhm.
it's
For
like
sure.
the universe is looking and going, okay, before they weren't ready, so we gave you little tidbits of
Mm.
little baby steps. Now the world is ready. Now's your time to shine. Boom, you expand and your gifts expand, and you're all of a suddenly doing something no one's ever possibly tried. And in your
And
mind, you're not sitting there going, I want to try something new. You're just doing
no, I'm not. I'm just trying to live my life. No.
it.
Yeah, I don't, and it's just, for example, I'm gonna say it's like not a party trick. Like there's people out there, psychics, for example, who are born psychics. I mean, there are children who are, saying, "Oh, mommy, so and so came to me, that I see dead people, and they're 5 years old, and or they have the imaginary playmate or what have you, and then they grow up to be, a psychic medium and helping people deal with grief, loss. So, that's really remarkable. But then the children who are born with a past life at a young age and start talking about that they used to be a pilot in, World War II or what have you. And then sure enough, they do the research and he has all the information correct. So just by embracing these special gifts that people have bestowed on them at a very young age, even the parents are the ones who are, I think, the most important ones because they're allowing the children to recognize this and they support them. And by doing so, you're allowing for the conversation to happen between the masses, and then all the other people are opening up and saying, oh, well, cousin Joey had that or whatever, but they didn't talk about it because they were possessed by a demon. Do you know what I'm saying? So the
Exactly. And
conversation has changed. So thank God for that.
it has. And one thing that I always thought was kind of interesting, and you touched on it for a brief second, is when and I'm meaning like your age group, similar to my age group, if we said, oh, I have an imaginary friend, your parents were like, oh, that's so great.
Yeah, that's so
That is
cute,
so
right?
cute. That's awesome. But if you go, I've seen a ghost, they're like, no, you didn't.
Right.
And it's like, and I think about it and I'm like, and I'm hoping I'm not ruining this for a lot of the future generations, but what's the difference between an imaginary friend and seeing a spirit? Because they're both the same. And so it's like, huh. And I don't want parents to start freaking out that their kids are seeing imaginary friends now. That's not the goal. The goal I'm hoping is the opposite of, well, if you're okay with them seeing an imaginary friend, be okay with
Mm,
them seeing a spirit and
right,
encourage it and,
right, right.
see where the world grows.
Yeah, well, it's hard though because a lot of well, maybe not now. I'm thinking more about maybe my mother and her mother, that generation definitely was not open to having, these kinds of conversations. So, but I think this new generation are more open to nurturing these special talents in their children. So that being said, what's going to happen when they're adults? It's going to be an amazing, you know, cultural experience, I think, for everyone to be able to be open with all of their special gifts. I mean, I pray that in the next, 50 years, it'll be a completely different story.
Yeah, I'll be honest when you say like praying the next 50 years. I'm hoping for like 10, 15 years.
Well, one can only hope.
But, but
Yeah. I'm
yeah, I
just saying,
mean,
I'm thinking about my grandkids actually. So,
but yeah, and I think one of the things we need to get aside from is everyone looking at going when they look into their family trees and genealogy and all
mhm,
of that genetics and going, well, my mom had it, my dad had it, there
mhm.
someone in their family had it, and trying to go,
Yep,
well, how far back does this go?
right,
And to sit there and realize it doesn't matter who in the family had it, if anybody in the family has it. If you have it, embrace it. Don't
right.
shun it away. And one of the catchphrases that I've been seeing a lot lately, and I'm really like getting behind, is let your light shine.
Yes,
Be the light beacon. And it's
that's
like,
right.
and my hope is, more people will step up and be that. But at the
Mm.
same time,
There's so
know
much
that
dark in the
as
world.
you're, well, that and as you're being a light beacon, you're going to have so much coming flocking to you. So keep yourself protected and balanced and safe
Right.
because, yeah, as I mean, I can say it as you can say too, is, we're bright beacons of light, but there are days that we're like, oh my God, the world is just too much right now. I
Yeah.
need a break. And
Yes.
there's nothing
Very
wrong
true.
with that. It's not,
No.
us not being protected. It's, there's only, when the energies are compiling on energies, you need to take time and
Recharge.
recharge, regenerate. I
Yeah.
mean, as funny as this is going to sound, it really does work. And if I thank my friend for pointing this out, is go and spend 5 minutes hugging a tree. You will be
Oh
amazed
my gosh, don't even get me started with trees.
at how
Do you see
much
all the
that
plants
helps.
back here?
I know,
I'm a tree hugger. Go figure.
but that, and I also want to thank you for not only, sharing your experiences and your stories, but is it okay to mention something that you mentioned to me in the pre-show?
Absolutely.
So one thing that you said that really struck a chord with me, and I was so excited to hear, was you were saying you were editing people's stories to help them get out.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a beautiful gift because so many people have so many stories to share and experiences, but get overwhelmed by the scenarios of what everybody says is involved in the process.
Mm.
And to have someone like you who steps up and says, this is going to be daunting, but I'm going to
True
get you
story.
through this. And, here's, what I
Yeah.
think will help get your
Yeah.
information out the way it's meant to
Yeah. Thank
is
you for saying
important
that.
because I know I'm working on a book, and one of
Mm.
the things in the back of my mind is I don't want a publishing company reading my book because they're going to tear it apart
Mm.
because it's not their story
Right.
to make what it will sell. And I'm like, that's
Mm.
not the point of my story, is not to
Right.
sell,
Right.
it's to be told.
Right. And then you need to self-publish.
I have started looking into that.
Good for you. That's how it gets out there. And, like you said, I feel really fortunate that I started working with a couple of authors in the paranormal society, if you want to call it that, um, who had a lot of stories to tell. And knowing what I know, I just felt like it was easier for me to edit a book like this for people because I understand them. I understand where they're coming from. I understand the language that they're speaking. I understand the stories that people are telling. And so it makes it so much easier for me to say, oh, why don't we say it this way because it makes more sense, blah, blah, or, just having more compassion for the subject matter, and like you said, a lot of publishing companies just don't have that. And to be honest, it's really hard to market something like that. So I mean, a lot of
And,
people are doing more self-publishing now, in the community who are writing books on the subject, and it seems to be very successful. So I say go for it.
and I actually, I just noticed the time and was like, I
Oh,
totally missed the hour mark to ask you if you could even go longer. So I
oh, and here we
apologize for
are.
that.
No worries, no worries.
It's like I love episodes where you get lost in the
That's right.
conversation and you're like, wait, how did the time fly by?
No worries at all. Well, it was a pleasure
So
talking to you.
it was a pleasure talking with you. And if anybody has questions for you, is there a particular way you want them to reach out to you?
Sure, sure. Well, I have an email. It's abducteeawareness@gmail.com. So abductee and then awareness, just all one word, at gmail.com. I have a blog. I haven't written on it for a very long time, but I have a lot of content there. And that's random alien brain droppings. Oh, wait a minute. No, it's abducteeawareness.blogspot.com. Same as the email address, but then I have a podcast as well. It's random alien brain droppings at podbean.com.
And I
And I'm
will,
also I'm on all the platforms. I'm on Apple and Spotify and all that as well.
and it was funny how you mentioned earlier how I found you. And ironically, what caught my attention, and I hadn't had a chance to watch it yet, was the title of your blog. And I was like,
Oh, awesome.
alien droppings. That sounds so cool. I got to have this person on.
Not that it makes any sense at all, but well, I'm glad you found me. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And hopefully we can have you back on sometime.
Sounds great. Sounds great, Michael. I would like that. And good luck with your book.
Thank you. And
You're welcome.
who knows, I may be asking for a favor and going, could you edit this chapter?
All right. Well, you have my info. Sounds great.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. And I do have to say thank you for trusting me because
Of
I know
course.
this was a blind interaction. We hadn't met. So I always like
No
to say
worries.
thank you for trusting me and being a
Of
guest.
course. I really appreciate you connecting. So thank you.
And thank you to everyone in the chat room. Thank you to everyone watching. And I will shamelessly say, if you are asleep, do wake up and watch this episode. It's a harmless subliminal message. Don't worry. No, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful night, everyone. And we'll see you on the next show. Good night.
Good night.